Super excited to share with you guys the first interview I've done for the Push Pull podcast. It's with Samir Jain. He is currently the Senior Director of Product at Medidata Solutions, working at the intersection of healthcare and life sciences right now. Samir is someone that is very mission-oriented and really committed to improving patient care in healthcare, and more so very specifically focused on what's called interoperability. It was super interesting to pick his brain on what was most valuable to his career progression. He talks about a focus on salesmanship, persuasion, which you always need as a product person. He talks very earnestly about the power of relationships and getting to know your colleagues as humans and friends and investing in them as people, not for any sort of transactional purposes, but just because that's how you should be operating in the world. And the other thing that I think is maybe a little bit more tactical advice for somebody that's trying to advance in their career, something that he has always focused on was the impact that the work that he was doing was having on the organization that he was working for. In more recent years, I think has refined that vision for himself, not just being about the magnitude of the problem, but also really wanting to define the problem space in service of the mission that he's serving, which is ultimately healthcare and better patient outcomes. So without any further ado, I'm gonna let you listen in on my conversation. We're here with Samir Jain, a Senior Director of Product at Medidata Solutions, a one-time boss and longtime mentor of mine.
Thank you so much, Warren. I'm so excited to be here. I mean, I love chatting with you in general. So I really look forward to talk with you today.
Yeah, absolutely. We had talked about the structure a little bit, walking through your whole career and identifying some of the key interesting points of maybe transitions and also the through lines that you feel have really helped you throughout your career. So first and foremost, let's just start with like 30 to 60 second overview of you, your career, and what you care about now.
Sure. I've been in the working world for about 20 years now. So it's been a decent amount of change and transition throughout my career. I actually started really young. Like I taught myself how to code when I was 13, just because I was so interested in that. And
Wow.
and so I had a very prescriptive thought of how my career is going to progress, right? So went to school for comp sci, graduated, took an engineering position, and thought that I would do that for a couple of years, maybe do consulting, and then go back to school, get an MBA, and then potentially start my own thing or do something of that nature. Didn't really work out that way. Started out in engineering, went into management, eventually into product management, went into consulting for a while, and then have been making my way back into product and product leadership specifically. Now at Medidata, I lead one of our products that really operates on the middle space between what is typically considered clinical research and healthcare. My entire career has been healthcare focused, and even within healthcare, a very specific topic, which is interoperability and the ability for systems to speak to each other in healthcare in support of better patient care, right? Like that's been the through line. You asked about the through line, right? So like that's been the through line in my career is kind of that and leveraging those capabilities to unlock business value across, various organizations. So love doing that here at Medidata. It's a great organization, great bunch of people. We can talk about Medidata a little bit more, but it's been a really fun gig and it's been an opportunity to kind of take that through line forward in like a slightly adjacent space, which is life sciences. So it's been awesome.
That's awesome. So a couple of things that are really interesting to me just right off the bat, from even looking back at the beginning of your career, going into software engineering and having that be something that was instilled really early on, learning how to code when you were a lot younger. At what point did you think you would have this lifelong career in healthcare or healthcare adjacent field that you're in now?
I had no idea. Honestly, I fell into it because I'd had an internship with someone during college. And as I was graduating, reached out to him to see if he had anything for me as a full-time gig. And he had just moved to this company that was building EHR systems, electronic health record systems in Raleigh. I was going to school up in Rochester. And he basically said, yeah, I've got something for you. We're opening up an entry-level position on my team. It's a software engineer. Come down and work for us. And not only that, but his particular product that he was building really was helping connect systems that are typically used at like a small doctor's office with the hospitals. And that's also how I fell into interoperability, which has been just totally happenstance but fell in love with it. And there were a number of reasons why. Healthcare is an interesting domain for me. It's complicated. It's helping people. First off, there's so much mission orientation within it, but then there's nuances, and a key differentiator for a person operating in healthcare is their ability to really understand the domain, which is something that I just like ate up at the time. The other thing that was really amazing about interoperability specifically within healthcare was it gave me the opportunity to work with so many different groups, both inside and outside of the company. I love building relationships across different groups. And that tends to be something that I treat as really valuable. And very early on in my career, gave me the ability to do that and really start to make a name for myself across the company.
That's awesome. And can you remind me what the name of the place that you were working at was at this
Yeah,
point
it
in
was
time?
called MySys. They
Okay.
eventually merged with a company called Allscripts. I spent, I don't know, maybe somewhere around almost 8 years over there, just working with them. It was again, all interoperability stuff that we did there. The team was laser focused on connecting our own EHR products together, but then also making sure that those were interoperable with other EHR systems that hospitals were implementing.
Tell me more about how your role evolved while you were there. You
Mhm.
were working as a software engineer. You were working on a specific subset of healthcare problems, which is interoperability, that put you in a position to interact with a ton of different people. And how did that change over time? How did the acquisition by Allscripts influence that? Would really want to know how your priorities and responsibilities changed and how you even shaped them.
So I started out engineering, right? It was interesting. Like I knew I wanted to go into management. That was just, I just knew that, right? It was something that I had started to cultivate throughout college and taking on leadership positions around campus and whatnot. Coming into that role, I almost was a little arrogant, like I was kind of like, yeah, I guess I'll do this for now, but really I want to get into management. And actually, my manager and friend and mentor at the time, he kind of like had to come correct a little bit. It was like,
Really?
dude, you're going to get there, but right now you're here and like, you need to nail this. Right. And it was a hard lesson for me to learn early on in my career. I'm so thankful that, he and I had that really crucial and difficult conversation early on. And so I really started to focus on building out my engineering talent and doing the job that I was hired to do. I also understood that there's other value that can be added. Like I'm not just a coder and that's the only thing that I can do. Where I thought I could really start adding value for my team was deeply understanding the domain, deeply understanding the problems that we're trying to solve, what our customers are going through. There was no product management function at the time.
Can I interrupt you real quick? So, when your friend, were you reporting into this person at the
Mhm.
time also? So, when he was telling you, like, hey, slow your roll on this whole management thing, you need to nail the role that you're in right now. I totally understand the kind of like gratitude and humility that came out of it. What was the thinking in the moment? Because I think a lot of people have probably been in the situation where they feel undervalued in the role that they're in, or feeling like they are already punching above their weight class, or they deserve the next level already, but are being told
Hey,
no in many different ways. What I'm trying to understand is why why did you at first see yourself being like, I'm going to be a manager first. I have so much more to offer. Like, put me in, coach, tap me in, promote me.
yeah.
And what was it that kind of like convinced you, like, oh, actually, the feedback that I'm getting back makes a lot of sense. Let me go back and kind of like expand the scope of the role that I'm currently in to make myself more valuable.
Remember this vividly, honestly, and this was almost 20 years ago. He used the term, "Dude, you've got to earn your chops first."
Okay.
That was awesome to hear. I mean, not awesome at the time, right? But it was in retrospect, like, yeah, that's what you have to do. And so, as I think about role expansion throughout my career, seniority is determined by the level of problems that the organization is entrusting you with and the
Mm,
accountability that you have and the level of the value that you bring to that organization. And you have to demonstrate it. I mean, you have to be trustworthy in holding those problems and owning those problems holistically as opposed to being handed a set of objectives and tasks. Rather, you really want to be owning the entire problem statement and building the trust to be able to deliver that a solution to that across the organization. When you can do that, you will get promoted. It comes with the territory. So if for folks that are maybe thinking about, hey, I think I'm ready to take the next step, or why am I not getting promoted here? I think part of that is potentially introspective of saying like, what is the level of problem statement or what are the level of problem statements that you're owning, that you're being entrusted with? And how do you start up leveling that? And if you can do that first, then the other stuff follows.
That's excellent. I think it kind of dovetails pretty perfectly into what you were talking about before, which was like you had realized, okay, I don't just need to be shipping code in this role. I could be owning bigger problem statements or more surface area when it comes to problem statements by adding value for the team, by deeply understanding the domain. And so this was the point at which you started talking about product management, which wasn't quite an established function at that point in time.
At that point, a lot of the engineering leaders were dual rolling in terms of understanding like what are the actual business requirements here? How am I aligning the team and their priorities to do that? I was moving into management. I had a great mentor that was my first mentor, the first guy that brought me into management. And that was a really interesting part of my life, I think. And I think about how I would mentor a new manager, right? And a lot of that is modeled on what I had learned through this person. His name was Dave. He was really formative in helping me kind of build out my management philosophy. Yeah, I'd got into management. I was being mentored into that role. I'm owning these business problems. I'm helping bridge the gap between how are we going to align the technology and the solution with the actual problem that we're trying to solve. Allscripts was starting to formalize out their product management function. They had brought in some product management leadership and was a product for my vertical, right? And he and I were working very closely together to align the roadmap and build it out.
And when you were entering management, you were managing other software engineers.
Engineers. Engineering manager. Exactly.
You were an engineering manager. Got it.
So again, I think I've seen the engineering manager role start to become more technical and delivery oriented now, but at the time it was really dual for us.
Gotcha.
So I was working. Yeah. And it's evolved, right? It's really evolved over time as product management and engineering have separated a little bit, right? I really value engineering managers that can deeply understand our priorities because they'll start to intrinsically guide the team towards the things that are actually very valuable to build. But, that's maybe less formal now. Well, this leader was hiring a product manager in his team to act as my counterpart, right? And so that I would own more of the technical stack. They would own more of the business and, roadmap and prioritization, like all that stuff that product management does today. As we were working together, I was just like, dude, is this something that you might be interested in? I know you're super technical. However, you also seem like totally obsessed with the business, right? So what's going on here? And so in a way, it was almost like a 70, 30, 60, 40 split maybe of technology as like the majority and then the minority being business. And he was basically just saying, hey, let's flip that, right? And you can start to focus more on working with customers, build that skill set out, focus more on the business, problem statements, and then work with a technology leader to help execute. You might actually be happier there, which is true, right? I loved it. That was been a really good friend throughout the years. His name is Amish. She's been amazing. He's the guy that got me, into product, and we've kept in touch and worked together. I'm Medidata now.
When I think about somebody going from engineering as a function into product management as a function, I see it as this kind of like horizontal jump. Were you going from a manager role to more of like an IC role? Was that something that had concerned you at the time? Were you feeling like you were like moving to a different ladder? And I know product management was really new as a function at the time too. Like, what did that look like to you? And as you were making that transition, especially as product management was kind of a nascent function, was there some risk there associated with it? That's something that I'm definitely curious about.
No, that is such a great question. And it's something that I thought about, right? So I don't know if there was risk there. I actually saw opportunity there because when I look at if, I'm trying to ultimately get into the executive track, like every executive that I know is not technical, or they could be technical. You have got CTOs that are super technical, but they understand the business and the value, right? That's what gets you into that next level, in my opinion. And so going into product management was an accelerant for that. And so like, I recognize that. So it didn't feel like risk, but the IC question is really interesting, right? Because on the one hand, you're going from a people manager position to a manager, but you're managing a product, right? And so the way that I had thought about it was back to what are the levels of problems that the organization allows you to own? right?
Mm,
And so I was owning the delivery, right? And the alignment of a team, but now I'm owning the success of a product for this company. So
yeah,
in a way, it felt like almost a promotion in the responsibility that I had, right? For all success of the putting to the right priorities, deeply understanding the customer's needs and de-risking the product in all these different ways. Like those were bigger problems that someone can start owning.
totally. Awesome. Yeah, that's so cool because it sounds like a lot of these transitions were very natural for you. Kind of along the way, you had gravitated to wanting to be a manager, understanding that there were some, the earning your chops was a really interesting conversation that you had with your friend at the time. It led to this place where you were able to bite off more, chew more into the business problems and stuff. And then that naturally led to you being able to, through your mentor, transition into product management, which at the time, even though it was maybe a lateral role, going from manager to IC wasn't really the same way we would look at that maybe today, going from like a manager, like an EM to ICPM role. It was more
Right.
about like you had a big amount of impact that you could have with an official business ownership capacity as a product
Exactly.
manager.
You got it.
Very cool. And so at this point where you're kind of like being a product manager, owning things as a product person at Allscripts, what was next for you? Was this the last position that you had at Allscripts? And
Yeah.
if there's more to talk about at Allscripts, that's great. If not,
No, I
how
mean,
did you end up winding down your time there?
I think this is one of those key transition points, right? So through my work in interoperability, external to the organization, making ourselves more interoperable with all of our competitors, made quite a bit of relation.
Right.
And so I made a really good friend along the way. He was leaving his position at a big company, starting his own thing, and reached out and was just kind of asking me like, "Hey, I'm doing this thing. Is this something that you'd be interested in doing with me?" And so for me, it was the leap of faith, right? It was going from this massive organization that was well established, that was doing well, and where I was seeing my own personal growth into becoming a consultant, right? At a company, I think I was employee number 5. There was this company called Ready Computing, and it was tiny, super niche focused, but he was sort of getting the bands together, if you will, of all these people that had been working at these various organizations in a similar role to mine and getting them all together to start doing some consulting around this very niche space. So, no,
And
I
that
was
niche
thinking
space being interoperability.
interoperability.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Tell me, and for the benefit of whoever might be listening, what is so cool about interoperability in healthcare? And why is it important?
Well, I mean, why is it important? Patients see a number of different providers across a number of different health systems throughout their life, right? And if you believe that it's true that people should make healthcare decisions based on the largest amount of knowledge possible, right? Then interoperability is critical, right? Like you have in order to give that provider the best chance at making the best decision for you. Now, why is it so challenging? I mean, there's all these different formats, there's different documentation habits. None of this stuff was standard back in the day. Like we're moving towards standards now, but even then there's a lot of variability. And so it's just a really hairy, complex problem of data liquidity, but also being able to deeply understand and use that data, right? So that's interoperability. And at the end of the day, I truly believe that an interoperable health system is one that's more safe, more efficient, less costly, just overall better. So that's really the end goal here.
And as you were kind of wrapping up at Allscripts in order to take this leap of faith, and this is one of those places where I like to think about the push-pull factors, right? So, and I'd be curious, it sounds like there was a really big draw, right? There was a really
Mhm.
big pull to where you were going next. What were the trade-offs that you were managing at the time to think about like, hey, I'm still getting X, Y, and Z at Allscripts, but at the same time, I may not be getting A, B, and C, which is what I'm really looking for. What would you say that were maybe the constraints or the things that you weren't as excited about, given the fact that you were already there for 6 years, 8, including
Yeah.
the company that ended up being acquired?
And it was more of a pull than a push for me on that one. Ultimately, the way that I thought about it was I've built enough momentum at Allscripts and I've built enough relationships and established myself there to where I could boomerang pretty easily if I needed to. It was a reversible decision. And that really,
Interesting.
it made a lot of, it had a lot of bearing on my ultimate decision. And it was like, it was just young in my career. I wanted to try something new. I was giving up the higher profile role, if you will, going from a PM of a pretty visible product in this organization to this unknown company, right? As an individual contributor consultant, not really knowing what my day to day was going to look like. It was a work from home role, which was, way before its time in that era.
Right.
This was in like 2012. So that was new and interesting. Felt like I negotiated that I could live anywhere in the world for at least a period of time. So
Nice.
I decided to recruit a friend and move to Munich for 3 months, as part of it.
That's
Just
amazing.
it was just kind of like adventurous, right? It was like, if not now, then when am I going to do this kind of stuff? And,
Totally.
and and so yeah, I mean, I took the leap of faith, and Ready was an adventure, man. It really was like building a company like that. I think we were around 200 by the time I left, which is like 7.5 years later.
And you were
Um,
employee number 5-ish.
mhm,
That's
yeah,
wild.
yeah, it was an amazing company. It still is. That's where, again, relationships, right? The through line in my career, but I really felt a lot of camaraderie with the folks that I was working with. We were friends more than we were coworkers, family even, and it was a very tight knit company. And that, I think, comes from that of working together early and really being in the trenches together. That level of closeness and camaraderie I've not felt anywhere else.
Yeah. And what do you think that was a function of, especially as someone that's working remote? I mean, we talk a lot about remote work and RTO nowadays and the efficacy of having people co-located and stuff like that. So it's really interesting to hear that you were doing remote work for the first time, as before remote work was such a ubiquitous thing, and also feeling like, yeah, actually, this was the most connected I felt with a team and with colleagues. What do you think was the secret sauce of making that happen there?
That's such a good question. I don't know. I mean, part of it was we were all friends before we were coworkers, that
Mm,
helps, but that's not it. I actually, so I may not, maybe not at quite the same level, but I feel that closeness to coworkers here at Medidata as well. And, I think a lot of it is you're intentionally selecting the people that you're bringing into the company with like a really strong, like no assholes mentality. These are the folks that not only
mm.
do you like to work with, but you want to hang out with. When you're working with people that you love working with, you can do amazing things.
So, a couple of things that are really interesting to me are obviously your personal career growth and how that changed over time. But also, how did it feel moving into consulting? And when I talk to folks that are designers or recruiters, a lot of the conversations that I end up having are about, hey, what are the key differences between working somewhere in-house versus being at an agency where you may have a number of different clients?
I would say the biggest thing that I missed leaving Allscripts was that deep ownership and connection with what I was building. It was a
Mm,
gun for hire, right?
yeah.
So yeah, you can say that you're making it your own, but it's not your own. You don't truly own the success or failure there. But the flip side of that is the variety of work that we were getting, as somebody that just loves to learn and craves a little bit of that variety, like that was a good way to scratch that itch. Um, it forced me to get pretty good with customers pretty quickly,
Mm,
and we haven't talked about this yet, but there's the relationship through line, but then there's also this like aspect of being good at sales,
mhm.
right? Something that I'd started to intuit, right, at Allscripts was I saw progressing into the executive level, no matter where they were in the organization, were good at sales.
Right.
And whether that was selling to a customer or selling internally, right? That has been an important skill set. Something that I think that people need to realize is you're in sales. Doesn't matter if you have a quota, but if you're an engineer, you're selling, complexity, and you're selling the need for tech debt reduction, and you're selling an architect. As a product manager, you're certainly doing the same thing. You're selling priority and whatnot. Started to realize that early on, like sales is a skill set that I need to be building. That's what I think helped me get into management and into product. But at Ready, I was as much as a consultant. You're delivering the work, but the really good consultants are also selling in a way, right? You're bringing
Yeah.
in more business. And that's what helped me level up at Ready as well, was again, them entrusting me to start having teams and consultants, right? Because I was able to sell the work. I was able to bring in that business.
Yep.
Um,
And
and
what
be able to,
were you also in charge of as a consultant, like closing a book of business? Was sales actually a part of your role?
No, like
No.
not, but informally, right? And maybe indirectly, as a consultant, you are looking to continue that relationship,
Yep.
right? Part of that is just delivering good work. Like you have to deliver, your deliverables have to meet the mark, but it's also building the relationships. It's understanding what other problems that customer has and trying to align your company's value with that, right? So it's intrinsic in the role in a way. You're building a deep enough relationship with that customer that they start trusting you with more of their problems. And so that's when a consultant is able to do that. Now that consultant starts leveling up from just billable hours to, all right, maybe you can start owning more of the business and maybe helping align other people's time and feeding them more work. And
Totally.
that's just how your responsibility set grows within a consulting company.
So let's talk about you making that transition into management at Ready Computing. At what point did you get to the point where you were advocating for yourself, kind of being more of a manager than an IC? What did that transition look like? How did your responsibilities change?
Yeah, great question. One was exactly what I just described, like being able to own the relationship with the customer and to start building that trust where you're elongating those relationships with your customers. The other thing that was really interesting, going back to the size of the company, I mean, you know, you have to build out all of the infrastructure for the company. That was how we career tracks that we want. And so as I started helping with the company's operations in that regard, like that was also a good setup for me to be able to take on more. Again, at a state, it's thinking about moving. How do you move just beyond your initial role into helping the company in other different ways, right?
Very cool. And so when you moved into management, like how quickly did you go from what were you managing people that were hired to work at the company already, or were you building a team around you? Combination of both.
I had recruited some folks that I had worked with in the past. And so those there were folks that we were already working with, started to take on as well. And it was just really kind of flavors of the types of consulting that we were doing were different across the board. One flavor, some colleagues had a different flavor, and we were all kind of moving into this structure of creating these different consulting verticals across the company.
And how did those consulting verticals work? Like, was it specific to the client type that you had, or was it specific to like a vertical of work or something
Yeah,
that you were doing across different clients?
it's like doing what you know. So we were working with like large health organizations, hospitals, and those that were trying to set up these exchanges to be able to exchange data more fluidly. I was working within our what we called our solutions consulting practice. And so that was really more targeted towards technology vendors in the space, the Allscripts of the world, where we were going in and helping them build out their interoperability stacks with this targeted group of people that had built these out at other companies before and were able to land in so they could focus on their core business value and not have to worry about the complexities of making their solutions more interoperable. So that was my niche, right, that I was owning with it.
How did your management style or your outcomes as a manager change? Or how did it compare and contrast with kind of working in-house at a place like Allscript versus like being a consultant with a book of business? How does that kind of change how you approach your direct reports and what you get them to prioritize as well?
It's a great question. The feedback cycles are a lot quicker in consulting. Billable hours is a key golden metric here. At
Right.
the end of the day, my team has to be billable. Otherwise, I can't justify the resourcing. And so that was a pretty cut and dry, metric that we were measured on. And so we have to focus on that. And then some of the intrinsics there are the customer relationships that these folks are building with their customers, right? How are they
Mm.
starting to zoom out and see the broader landscape of their customers? And that's like the skill set that we were trying to cultivate. It wasn't just technical, but also how are you really working with customers to give them a delightful experience so that they trust you with more of their problem statements. That's maybe a little bit harder to measure. You can think about that along with how are you creating value to the organization. So that's how we viewed seniority within our consultants as well, was who do we trust to be able to really own those customer engagements versus who are the folks that are just like kind of there to deliver the nitty gritty technical work, and how do you start up leveling those people as they start growing in their career?
What did you like and dislike about that? Like, what are the pros and cons just from like the perspective of your own sense of job fulfillment that you saw coming out of it? Like, one of the things you were saying was that maybe it's like a little bit harder to measure, but I'm curious what you liked and disliked about it.
The biggest thing was around mission. And this is maybe the thing that ultimately I don't pushed me out. It was something that I was craving. Mission there, while it was to build a more interoperable health system, it's hard to draw a direct line to that per se. The bigger mission was how do we loved the way that our founder, Mike, the way that he thought about it was, if we had 50 people, I'm putting food on 50 tables right now. Right. And that was absolutely his mission. But that wasn't necessarily solely mine over time. Right.
Yeah.
And I loved making Ready a great place to work and building the team up and bringing more people into the organization. But ultimately, I also was in love with the problem statements within healthcare. Right. So I wanted to tackle that.
That's
That's ultimately kind of like what
No, but I think that makes sense, right? Like, it's like what you were looking for, what you were engaging with was a very specific mission. And what you had experienced at Allscripts was the ability to kind of like slice and dice that mission in pieces for specific clients, but like overall serving the growth and success of the consultancy that you were working for at the time, which like totally noble, also solving problems in the space that you wanted. But it sounds like you were doing so by attacking the problem in probably more kind of like segmented ways that weren't looking at the entire problem of interoperability in healthcare holistically. And so that totally makes sense as a reason to push you when what's actually drawing your sense of fulfillment and energy and excitement was the strategic problem of interoperability in healthcare as a whole.
Yeah. And I mean, the other thing was, I love variety. I love to learn. You've probably heard of like the T-shaped mentality of knowing a little bit about a lot, but then being able to go deep in one area.
Right.
How eventually over time, it's 7 years at Ready, 7.5 years. It was, I think, my longest tenure. I was starting to think like, I know interoperability really well, but healthcare is a wide vertical and I know one narrow slice of it. So what else is out there? All right. What else can I start learning about? Staying in healthcare. I didn't want to leave healthcare. I don't think I ever really do. But what had started to formulate this thesis around the broadband is becoming ubiquitous. People are getting more and more comfortable buying things and having experiences online that they wouldn't normally have, right? We're meeting our mates online. We're buying mattresses and cars online now. And so my hypothesis was, all right, telemedicine and telehealth is going to be the next big thing. So I had a friend at Teladoc who was the leader in in that space at the time. And they just happened to have a position in product leadership that owned one of their products. And so I went through the process, landed there in March of 2020, which was an amazing time, frankly, to join a telehealth company.
One thing I want to zone into a little bit more is maybe the motivations for joining Teladoc. You talk a little bit about this hypothesis that you have about the future of healthcare. And there's also this kind of sense of like the interoperability niche was something that was really exciting to you. But at the same time, it felt like you were being kind of narrow in your scope, like going really deep into one problem in healthcare. And that was also kind of a push factor, right? Like, so you're at this place where interoperability really interests you, but you don't feel like you're necessarily able to tackle that whole picture working client by client at a place like Ready Computing, right? How you were thinking about like problem statements and what you were excited about. But at the same time, here's how I'm piecing together the story a little bit. You're thinking, okay, I'm kind of tackling this mission piece by piece. But then when I'm thinking about how I could be impacting this mission as a whole, is this still kind of too niche of a problem that I've been working on for such a long time? Like, do I want to expand my horizons a little bit within healthcare? Was that kind of how you were thinking about it at the time?
What I wanted to do was use interoperability to further business problems, not necessarily build interoperability solutions.
Okay.
So
Okay.
that was a big one for me. You could go one of two ways. Like you could double down on working for companies that are driving interoperability forward, or you could start to leverage that deep knowledge in this one space to start adding value to the rest of the organization.
This is actually really interesting because it feels like a lot of the kind of more recent product management talk about like outcomes over outputs. I'm thinking a lot of the more recent Marty Kagan stuff. And when you say interoperability to solve business problems rather than products that are categorized as
Yeah,
interoperability, right? That sounds like the kind of distinction that you were making at the time and really trying to achieve the former. Okay, cool.
that's
Then,
right. Yeah.
yeah,
And, there are folks that need to lay down the track, right? Without a doubt. And that's incredibly important. But then there's also the folks that need to figure out how to build the trains on top of the track and get people from point A to point B. And that's where I was starting to think about, okay, now that I know how this works and what the capabilities are, can I start to use that knowledge, but, you know, own the outcome, right? How does this actually help people receive better care at the end of the
yep,
day,
yep.
right? That's really where I was thinking Teladoc would be a really interesting place to go. Was I was seeing this new delivery modality starting to really take shape. I hadn't done a telemedicine visit before I joined, but after doing one, it was amazing. Right? It was such a good experience. And so I drank the Kool-Aid pretty hard going into Teladoc. You targeted. It wasn't like I was blasting my resume out and
Right.
seeing which one stuck. Like it was, I wanted to get into this company. They were the leader. I knew what they were doing. I had a friend there. They had a position that I felt was a good fit. And so that's the way that it went.
Very cool. Cool. And so tell me about the first few weeks there are chaos. What were the things that you shipped that you're super excited about?
I'm part of this Slack group where any new member, we always ask, what's the thing that you're most proud of shipping? And what's like the stupidest thing that you've ever shipped? This was my answer for both of those categories when I joined. It was like a normal onboarding flow for like a week. The country shut down, our visits quadrupled overnight,
Wow.
literally, and it was just absolute chaos with the pandemic. People weren't able to go in to see their healthcare providers anymore. All of a sudden, everyone and literally their mother are coming to Teladoc. So the week 2.5 or 3 on the job, I'm still completely onboarding. I have no idea, what's left or right or up or down. What was going on was there was a lot of people that we called the worried well that were coming in and saying, I've got the sniffles. Do I have COVID? Right. And they're just completely obliterating our queues, And so we needed a way to you know, divert these people out, right? Like to really start to classify the folks that are coming in as high risk versus low risk. And if it's low risk, here's what you should be doing. So I built a screener in partnership with our medical leadership team and engineering that we launched pretty quickly. I do think we launched it like, you know, week 3 of March or week 4 of March, something like that. But it was basically you answered a set of questions, and based on those answers, you were either low. It was, I think, like one of 3 outcomes where you were either low risk, you don't need to talk to a provider, do this, right? High risk, like, actually, yeah, stay on the line. We probably want to talk to you, or somewhere in the middle. We're not sure. You can stay on the line, but also you can come off and monitor for these things. And if you start to see these things, like come back. That was designed again with our medical leadership team, who, by the way, at that time had like direct access to the CDC. And it was really cool to work with them and be really on the front lines of what was going on. Right.
That's so cool. Wow.
But yeah, so it built that. It was the good glorified switch statement at the end of the day. And it actually made an impact, right? Like it was the first thing that I shipped super quick. I felt like I was contributing to the mission. I always think you got to like earn your chops, right? Got to do something meaningful early on in your tenure career so that you can gain the respect and trust of your coworkers, right?
Totally.
And what was really cool, we put some reporting around it, and it started to become predictive of where we were seeing clusters of COVID infections. So we could see in this area, there's a bunch of people that are categorizing into high risk. And we would see them before the government or the news outlets would start to report clusters of infection.
It's crazy.
So one of the stupidest things I've shipped, but also like one of the coolest, right?
That's amazing.
Just given the circumstances.
Okay,
So it was
so
cool. Yeah.
that's so awesome. And so on the heels of that success, how did the rest of your time in that role specifically? Because I know that you had a little bit of a transition while you were at Teladoc too, right?
So I actually really loved taking on leadership in that role. So it was our virtual second opinion business, something that was actually kind of a departure from like interoperability.
Yeah.
And it was nice to be able to just prove that I had was not like a one trick pony. So
Right.
that being said, Teladoc had really, they didn't have a lot of clinical technology DNA at the time, technology. And they had, they built their own EHR system, good for what it did, but it hadn't, there was a lot of interest in the company, especially become a little bit more aligned with a typical healthcare organization, which
Right.
is really what we were becoming, right? Um, and so that was another niche that I was able to carve for myself, in the company, was bringing that deep like EHR knowledge from my Allscripts days, knowledge from my Alticon, do to help up level this part of our technology stack to be more aligned with what a hospital would use, right? Before that capacity became official for me, I was doing that on the side of my desk while, trying to manage this product as well. And one of the cool things there, we were trying to launch a virtual primary care practice and found that what we had done for our, what we call general medicine, which is almost like virtual urgent care at the end of the day, wasn't necessarily going to translate well into primary care. I was tapped on the shoulders to do the kind of like build versus buy versus partner analysis here, and we ended up bringing in some technology that really helped us launch the product and launch it in a way that was safe, gave our patients a good experience, but also the providers that were working on it, gave them the right amount of technology to be able to deliver effective medicine to their patients. So that was really cool. And then, I mean, ultimately that role ended up taking on just clinical platforms, for the company. And it felt like a very natural thing. It was like pulling back into what I just knew, right?
Yeah. And so it sounds like when you made the transition to Teladoc, there was this question about interoperability, the outcomes of interoperability versus like, the products that are categorized as interoperability. But, when you encountered this opportunity, you were thinking, actually, this could be a good bet generally for my career because this is the future of medicine, right? Using interoperability can still be done at a company like Teladoc, but
Yeah,
this also gives you the opportunity to flex those product muscles outside of your current
exactly.
domain expertise. And you were able to prove that out kind of in the first few months
Yeah.
before transitioning into something that was able to leverage that domain expertise that you had built up over the past 15 years of your career, let's say.
Yeah. And it's like it was a slightly different world, it was in the same domain, but talking back about those relationships, I mean, when you're working for a niche consulting firm, that world is limited, right? And then with Teladoc, it's a much wider world. We were working with so many different people, payers and startups that were innovating in the field. And it was just a totally new set of brain muscles that would have to flex, and all this, like all these new relationships that I was able to like had the opportunity to create and learn about. And I mean, it kind of came down to not so much it was just, can this give me an opportunity to learn something, staying within, my domain, but
Yep.
learn something vastly different and start to build like new connections in my brain and hopefully level up that way over time.
Very cool. And then, so how did your time at Teladoc, how did you end up wrapping up your time there?
Yeah.
What were the kinds of things that you were, what were the
Neat.
opportunities that came your way?
Teladoc is becoming a huge company, There had been a lot of growth right through the pandemic, and there was a well-timed inbound, from someone at Rubicon that, had one of my coworkers at Teladoc moved over there, and she had recommended me for a product leader role there. And so they reached out, went through the process, and it was just like, it was hard for me to say no to that.
Yeah.
It was the same sort of situation. Every transition, it's probably somewhat, maybe not always the case, but certainly at that point, it felt reversible. If I needed to come back to Teladoc, I could. But again, it was a leap. It was a much larger responsibility. So we say organization,
Mhm.
but I own, it was a head of product role, right? So I was owning a lot more of the problem stack for that org. And that's actually where we met.
Yes.
And so that was what I really to going back where I can make a bigger impact and really help take us from a single product company to something that had a portfolio of products that we were delivering, and in a space that I knew pretty well, right? And where a lot of that interoperability background would really start to come in handy. So that was a pull to Rubicon.
When it came to leaving Teladoc, like what were the things that you were leaving on the table in order to kind of like join a smaller company, totally understand the kind of like pull factors. There's more ownership here. Even if there wasn't anything necessarily pushing you away from Teladoc, right? There were trade-offs that you're making with every decision. Like you're leaving this gigantic company that's having explosive growth. How do you come down to the side of, hey, maybe this is more of a risk and I'm taking a leap of faith here? What validates or fuels that faith a little bit when you're weighing the trade-offs of leaving something that feels maybe a little bit more like stable? I'm not sure how you would have categorized Teladoc at the time, but
I wasn't necessarily looking for stability anymore. Sort of like if I leave Teladoc and go and join even like a larger company, like a Google or something like that, I'm like, ultimately, if I do that, I'm end up in the position, or I'm going to be chasing the position that I'm being offered at Rubicon, right? Or let's short circuit that and just do this. It's going to be a stretch, and I'm going to be uncomfortable, right? And there's going to be a learning curve, but let's see how I do. And if it doesn't work, then, hopefully I've got something that I can fall back on. To me, it was that leap of faith.
One of the things that I also feel, so there was like a couple of things that are like through lines in your career that we've talked about so far. Like one of them is relationships. The other one is sales and the ability to sell effectively. And the other one that I think that I'm hearing a lot, and I think you have really pointed to as something that you would suggest and advise other people to think about, is the level of responsibility that an organization is willing to give you. And that being kind of like not only a sense of your own ability to grow in your career, but that also like it feels really resonates with you in terms of a sense of fulfillment. Maybe talk about the distinction between Teladoc and Rubicon MD at the time, where it's like, hey, like you're going to own product here. Like you're going to be the head of product, VP of product for this company and come in at smaller organization, but like total ownership of kind of like where this thing goes, versus like here's where you're leveraging your expertise at Teladoc, which is a much bigger company, but maybe your sense of ownership or the ownership that you were being entrusted by the company was not necessarily as big or as bold as what Rubicon was giving you. Is that fair to say?
I think it's very fair to say. Yeah. I mean, it's the level of problems and impact that you're entrusted with in the organization is like really interesting. And it's also changing the mindset to being able to drive or maybe to start creating clarity out of the unknown. Like at Teladoc, I knew what I needed to do. The problem statements were obvious to me. I knew these are the things that we need to solve, and it's a matter of figuring out how to solve them. But then there's like knowing which problems you should actually consider, right? Identifying the problems. And that's where, a role like that at Rubicon, provides me. In a way, it's almost more aligned to the original role at Teladoc, where I was owning a product line, because to a certain degree, there are no problem statements there that you're trying to figure out.
Yeah.
And so there was that delivery focus versus something that's more creative and exploratory.
That makes a lot of sense. I think we, especially in the moment, have this sense of, oh, okay, I have a new opportunity. I want to go into that. It's not totally bad where I am, or I'm not necessarily looking to run away from something. But when we're thinking about the push and pull factors, they are all there. And it's really interesting to hear from you about your time at Teladoc when you were choosing to leave and, well-timed call, somebody that was a former colleague, a relationship that you had built, but like ability to own not only a full problem stack, but the thing that you just said, which was being able to go into asking and defining what problems there actually are rather than just the execution of solving a problem that you've been given. That's huge because you actually had what you were joining Rubicon MD for, Teladoc, when you were first joining. And so when you had moved to leverage your expertise, like that was really cool in some ways because you were already an expert in that field. But what you were really yearning for and what you were not getting anymore was the ability to actually define the problem.
I think you summarized it perfectly. I mean, that's exactly what it was. My time at Rubicon was pretty short. You and I actually started like the same week or with weeks of apart. Each other or something like that.
You interviewed me before you started there.
Yeah, and I was like, you got to hire this guy. Right? He needs to be on our team. Let's get it done. But as a month after we both started or something like that, some crazy short amount of time, Rubicon was acquired, right?
Yep.
By an absolutely incredible organization, by the way. Oak Street Health is amazing. Their mission is amazing. The way that they've structured the way they solve their problem statements is really amazing. The team there was outstanding. Um, and so that was interesting, like this job that I think I can understand what needs to be done, right? To all right, like the fundamentals have actually just totally changed here, right? I've got to start to create stability for the team because I've been through a shitload of mergers in my life, and I know this, and we can take the fear out of this a little bit. So there was that, which I thought was really cool. Actually, I enjoyed doing that. But then going back to the what are the problem statements that we're trying to identify and solve versus what does Oak Street need us to do?
Right.
Those are two different things. And so as I had reached out to the guy that got me into product management in the first place, we had kept in touch throughout my career. I was like, here's kind of the situation. It's been like 10 months, how should I think about what's next, right? What does timing look like? What are the things that I'm really looking for at this point? He gave me some really good advice, but one thing that he had said was, hey, listen, by the way, if you're even remotely interested in just at least talking with us, we're doing something that's right up your alley here. And, one thing led to another. And I couldn't say no to Medidata. The way it had been positioned for me, there wasn't an open role. My manager, the guy that leads healthcare, literally just flew out. We met, it clicked, and what they were trying to do, where my background fit in, it just completely made sense. And so he created a role for me.
Just so people understand, what is the difference between what Medidata does and where you've been in the past? What is that kind of overall mission? Like what has been their bread and butter, and what are you coming in to do?
Yeah, so Medidata, it's one of the leading technology providers that powers clinical trials. A huge amount of new drugs that are brought to market have been brought to market on our platform. Um, I work with the top 18 of the top 20 pharma companies
Wow.
that run their trials on our platform. It's a pretty amazing amount of impact. Um, those companies are the drug manufacturers typically. Or the CROs, the ones that are running the clinical trials. Where we intersect with healthcare is the trials are actually typically being run at those research sites, which are also like academic research centers, hospital systems. And so those are our users at the end of the day. But our primary customer right now are the pharma companies. And then the other thing that I've noticed about why I like it so much here is there is that strong, like, no asshole rule. The people here, the culture here is amazing. That comes from the top,
Yep.
folks that they've hired, the willingness to really get into the dirt, with you and help out. And I've become very good friends with a lot of my coworkers here. And that has made a huge amount of difference and impact in my enjoyment of work and what I do. I mentioned early on in my career, I started to intuit that sales is probably it's a skill set that is going to be important.
Right.
That where I was talking to one of my mentors there. He's the guy that was leading the primary care business and just asking him for feedback after working together with him for a while. He's like, all right, let me ask you a question. Can you sell? And I was kind of like, yeah, I guess. And I've never been in a sales role. And he was like, the most dangerous guy in the room that I've ever met is the guy that's super technical, but can sell. So like figure out how to sell. And that made it click for me. This is a skill set that needs to be formalized. And that's something that I really dove head into at Medidata here. My position here, as much as it is building a product, it's being able to work with customers to help them understand the value and to align it to what the problems that they're building. And I've had the opportunity to really work very closely with our customers and with our sales team and really build out that part of my brain really in a way. That's been awesome. It's been so much fun to do that.
That's really great. You were talking about how when you had this conversation and it really clicked for you about sales, you started looking back and like applying that filter to all of the times
Mhm.
that you were kind of successful in different parts of your career. Like you were talking about the time at Ready Consulting that you realized like you were actually being really effective at selling either internally to your team or externally to your clients and maintaining that relationship, which I think is so incredibly cool that you were able to actually lean into a skill set that you didn't quite know how to articulate at the time, but now you have a framework for that. Is that fair to say? Like,
Yeah.
how would you kind of define that, or how would you suggest someone think about sales as someone who's not in sales?
So great questions. Number one, yeah, that's accurate, right? And then number two, sales isn't necessarily just selling a product to a buyer. I think that's a mentality shift. It's the power of influence at the end of the day and persuasion. When you realize that is a part of your success in a role, is the ability to cultivate that skill set, then you can start learning to do that. So that doesn't mean that you have to go as an engineer and try to get customer FaceTime, but it is understanding as an engineer, for example, trying to understand the folks around you, like what are they thinking? What are their problems that they're owning? What does their world look like? And then start to align your own thoughts into that. And that starts to become how you persuade. And I think about seniority in engineering. It's not just technical ability, right? Like it's the ability to explain some deeply technical topic to some stakeholder that's not quite as technical, the way that they grok it and can understand what you're trying to say. That to me is seniority in engineering. In order to do that, you need to understand what they like, the information that they're looking for, understanding their problem statement. Does this person need? And then how can I deliver to them what they need, right? In a way that's going to be that they'll trust me and, is going to add value to them. That's the skill set that people need to cultivate, I think. And that's universal. If you can do that, you will level up in your career.
Totally. That's wonderful. We've covered a lot and a lot of the big transitions, and even in recent years, which are like maybe shorter tenures than the kind of like 7 to 8 year tenures that you had in the past at Allscripts, Ready Computing, but still incredibly meaningful work and also really thoughtful decisions as to like why you made transitions maybe sooner than you would have, right? So like the push factors from Rubicon MD make perfect sense because obviously when the scope of your role changes as a result of an external event like an acquisition, right? Like you were finding the things that were like, well, actually, I could be a big support to the team in navigating a merger. Like I've done this before. That's fantastic. But then you also get an invitation to be working on something where you actually can like define a problem space, which is what you were looking to do more of regardless, right? And so when you see that trade-off, you're going to join a new company. And then, it sounds like along the way, you're building great relationships and like, this no assholes mentality like makes a lot of sense. But it also sounds to me like, the reversible decisions that you see at multiple times during your career, a lot of it is because you're not an asshole. Like I think like at you attract, I do think like attracts like, and you end up in situations where you're a warm person as someone that's worked with you and for you. I've noticed how quick you are to shout people out and give people their props. I really think that's all good karma that you put out there, not to get anything back out of it. End up doing that a lot. It builds a lot of goodwill very quickly, which I think is really wonderful.
You can start to think of people more than just coworkers, but as humans and, people that you actually enjoy interacting with, right?
Yeah.
Then that really starts to go a long way. So I think you have to be genuine in that. You can't be the typical, I don't know, super nice and complimentary, but having the ulterior motive that you want to try to motivate this person to do what you need them to do. You have to be more genuine about it, I think.
Yeah. Anyway, a lot of that is just me kind of reflecting on this conversation so far and trying to lead into like, how are you thinking about the next phase of your career?
I want to continue growth here. I think that there's a lot of problems to solve in life sciences. Coming from healthcare and seeing the differences in life sciences, really exciting innovation happening in healthcare. Sound like we were pushing the stone up the hill. It's like difficult to build and pilot solutions. In life sciences, we get a lot more shots on goal, and there are companies that are really willing to go on like an innovation journey with you. So yeah, it's really that. It's continuing to build in this space and start to change the way that people think about clinical research as like this silo and healthcare delivery as this silo, because in reality, they're so intertwined. And I don't think the world has truly realized that yet. So to me, that's where a lot of the opportunity lies in our future.
I think that this has been a really cool conversation. This is one of many that we've had on the topic of career. And so thank you for taking the time and all of the extra time to prep with me and really think about what's really salient. I feel like we could keep talking for hours.
I know. No, this has been so much fun, man. Thank you for the opportunity. I just so enjoyed working with you. The energy that you brought to the team, talking about the no asshole rule, right? Like you met that in spades. And you're like probably top 3 karaoke partners that I've ever had. Right? So we've had some really fun times together. And
Yeah.
this has definitely been one of them. And thank you so much.
Thank you for being so thoughtful and candid, and also like letting me dive in and kind of get into the nitty gritty. Thanks, Samir.
It's been a blast, man. Thank you so much.